All right. We've looked at 1 Samuel starting out on Sunday with the first couple of chapters. I'm not real keen on how they split up these chapters, but we'll try to do the best we can with it. This time dealing with some of what happened to Eli and the beginning of the time of Samuel to be judge. It was brought up on Sunday, some of these things about the times of the judges and so forth, putting this in kind of a chronology, which I want to try to do here for just a little while before we get started with the main lesson. Israel ruled by judges starting about 1375. Samuel's born, recognized we're still under the time of judges then and are all the way up until the time for Saul to become king. What's typically given is 40-year reigns that you have from there. Saul in 1050, David in 1010, and then Solomon in 970. So you'd have 40 years of reign with each one of those as king. Backing up before that, if Samuel's born in 1085, that's what was looked at back in 1 Samuel chapter 1. And now he's in this time of his life that he's beginning to be one who'll serve as a judge from what we see this evening beginning. On the map that we're looking at with regard to Israel here, just the area of Palestine, we're going to center in on this part down here with regard to the Philistines. You have three cities of the Philistines that are given as major cities there: Ashdod, Ascalon, and Gaza. And those three are what you'll see repeatedly as we deal with the Philistines. And they're going to come up over and over again. The best find that we have with regard to knowing more about the Philistine culture is down in Lachish here. It is an archaeological find that has rendered a lot of, just a wealth of information on not only on the Philistines, but the time of Israel as well. A great deal of knowledge has come out of that, and a great deal of things that have gone hand in hand with what the biblical record is saying. So we'll notice some of that probably through this section of time as well. All right, let's look at chapter 3 beginning. Verse 1 says something that we need to keep in mind. The boy Samuel ministered before the Lord under Eli. In those days, the word of the Lord was rare, or precious, as it says in, I think, the King James and American Standard. There were not many visions. What does that mean? The word of the Lord was rare or precious, not many visions. Okay, since he wasn't speaking, then at that time, were there a lot of things that were being done by miraculous action? No, it was rare at that time. If you look and you notice in the Bible, as we look at it from our time perspective, and we look back and see some of the things that took place in the Bible, I think most of us would have a concept that almost all the time there's something miraculous going on back then. Before you had the close of the New Testament confirmed that those kind of things were happening continually, and that's not what the Scripture says. The Scripture's pretty clear, as in there are several times when you see a mass of that miraculous action that takes place at a time. For instance, at the creation, you see a great deal of that. Obviously, why? Because everything's starting, and you're getting that involved. God is showing his power as creator then. The next thing that you see of much in the way of miraculous action is in the time of going out of Egypt or the beginning of the law. Moses coming in, the plagues that take place. Now, are there some other miraculous actions that take place? Yes, but again, very rare, as it's pointed out. There's a flare during that time in which the law is given and it's being confirmed. Then you have a time in which the prophets are given, and they are speaking the will of God many times because the law has been lost, or they're not teaching it. Especially the priests and the Levites, as they should. And so there's a need to again reveal elements of God's law and to have a confirmation of those. And then when? You have about 400 years of silence in between the Old and New Testament. Then you come along and you find in the New Testament Jesus and then his apostles that are declaring the word. There's a great deal of miraculous action at that time. Now, outside of that, you don't see a lot of that. And that's what you see in this passage. In this time, it was precious or rare that these things were being done. Now, why would that be? When you think about it, why would that be that they were rare at that time? One reason, were they listening to God? So if they aren't listening and they have no will to listen, what's God going to do? He's not going to speak there. If it's not going to do any good of people listening there, what else? What did they have? Go ahead. Okay. All right. And certainly them as ones that God would work through, that's not going to happen. When they're being ungodly, that would be a use of them in a way that God does not act in that fashion. What other reason can you think of? What did they have? All right, they had the law already, and they could read that law. If there was a desire to do so, they could be educated by that. In the time of the New Testament, Jesus tells a story about a rich man and Lazarus. Lazarus died. He goes to torment. He looks across, says to Abraham, have Lazarus go back and do what? Talk to my brethren so they won't come to this place. And what's said to them? They have Moses and the prophets, let them listen to them. That was a long time for Moses and the prophets. It had been over 400 years since the last of the prophets, Malachi, had even spoken. But the point was, the revelation is available. It doesn't have to be coming all of the time. If it's available, it's recorded, and we can know it, then it exists, and it's able to be seen by anybody who wants it. So, in this time, he says, that revelation was one that was not being done a great deal. It wasn't just a commonplace thing. So now tell me what happens in the rest of the chapter.
The Lord calls out to Samuel.
Okay. Samuel's growing up in the house of who? Eli. And so he comes to Samuel and he says, Samuel, Samuel. What does he say? Okay, where does he say that? Okay, goes to Eli. Thinks Eli is calling him. It's also made very clear with verse 1. This explains why it is that Samuel immediately thinks that this is Eli rather than God, because this isn't a commonplace thing going on here. He goes to Eli, says, I'm here, and Eli says, what? I didn't call you. So how many times does that happen? 3. The last time, what does Eli figure out? It's got to be God calling him. And so he says, if you hear that again, say what? Speak, Lord, your servant hears. And so he goes back, and what happens this time? God calls again, And what does he say? Speak, your servant hears. It's always interesting to me that there's a lot of times when people are coming face to face with one who's bringing them the message of God, that it obviously frightens them and causes them some bit of clear shaking at the knees, if you will. But he does say, speak, Lord, thy servant hears. He cuts that a little bit short, and it's obvious that he's one that is very frightened and also very humbled at the point of the Lord speaking to him. So what in substance then does the Lord tell him?
It's time for things Eli should be judged to happen.
Okay. The things of the judgment of Eli and his family, if you notice in verse 13, I have told him that I will judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knew, because his sons did bring a curse upon themselves, and he restrained them not. Then he says, and therefore I have sworn unto the house of Eli that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be expiated with sacrifice nor offering forever. Does that mean that this was something he could never be forgiven of his sins, that Eli could not? What does it mean that he would never be forgiven? In what sense is that the point?
Cannot escape the consequences.
Okay. He was one who was a judge. God had used him to speak through. Would he continue to do that in the future? Would he continue to do that in the future even if Eli came back and said, I'm sorry, and repented? No, he wouldn't. There's a consequence there. That he had so abused his place in failing to restrain his sons that he no longer was going to be used in that way before God. And that's the point, that the things you've done, there's no sacrifice to expiate that. You are condemned and you're going to be brought out of this. You'll suffer death. And so that's the judgment that is made. How does Samuel react to that?
He was kind of afraid to go tell him that.
All right. Why?
He respected Eli.
Okay. He had grown up under Eli's tutelage. What else? I heard somebody say.
It's not good news.
Okay. Yeah, you don't want to be the bearer of bad tidings, do you? This is about as bad as it gets. And so he's hesitant to say anything. But when Eli asks him, what does he do? He tells him. Think about that. That had to be a pretty courageous action there on his part to do that, recognizing that God had spoken, and now he's going to have to tell the one that he's looking to as his mentor and basically almost a father figure to him, that he's going to be killed and his two sons are going to be killed. And the reason is because they did not do what God would have them to do. Go ahead.
Harry, I know this is backing up just a little bit, but I'm curious about, like in verse 7, because in my mind, I always thought Eli really did raise him up in the knowledge of the Lord. And when I read it this time, I'm like, it sounds as if he fails in that. Like, what is that? Is the original rendering here?
I think that is the point that's being made in verse 1, basically, and that is that he does not know him yet, does not know Jehovah. He's not come face to face with or come to the message of God. God's not ever used him as a prophet to speak through. I think that's the point that he's making there in that particular case. And he says, neither was the word of Jehovah yet revealed unto him. And so that's the sense, that he had not come before the Lord to speak with him as a prophet would, as he did later on down the line, as he did just a little bit further, and that he was not yet a spokesman as a prophet in that way. I think that's the idea, not that he hadn't raised him to tell him about God or anything like that. All right, anything else there? Okay. After we have this thing, he tells him about that. How does Eli react to this message?
He says, "It is the Lord. Let him do what seems good to him."
All right. He was accepting that since there's no other alternative, basically. It's a recognition, kind of a solemn rendering, if you will, that, well, what God says is what's going to happen. And he recognizes that's the facts that are there about it. At the end of this particular chapter, in verse 19, it gives us that Samuel beginning to grow and now to serve as a prophet of God. Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and let none of his words fall to the ground. And all Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, knew that Samuel was established as a prophet of the Lord. And the Lord appeared again at Shiloh, for the Lord revealed himself to Samuel at Shiloh by the word of the Lord. Okay, want to get a couple of things here before we go. He grew, the Lord was with him, and let none of his words, what? Fall to the ground. Have you ever seen that phrase before? Where's that come from? Go back. Will someone read for me, please, Deuteronomy chapter 18. Deuteronomy 18 and verse 22. Anybody? All right. DJ, Deuteronomy 18:22.
When a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if the thing does not happen or come to pass, that is the thing which the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken it presumptuously. You shall not be afraid of him.
Okay. So what is the point being made? If it doesn't come to pass, if any of his words fall to the ground, they don't come to pass, what is he? All right, he's a false prophet. He's not a true prophet of God. The thing which he says is not what I said to him. If you back up and look at the paragraph before, starting with verse 15, going through verse 19, he's speaking messianically of the Christ that would come, and he would speak to him as he had spoken unto Moses face to face. And the point was made that none of what he says will fall to the ground, verses 18 and 19. And then he deals with the prophet. The test of a true prophet was always this. Now, does that give you a test that if 90% of what he says comes true, then he's a true prophet? How much? All of it. If there's one word, is the point, that falls to the ground, doesn't come to pass, that one's not a prophet of God. He's not spoken in the name of God correctly. So that's the tall order for one who is a true prophet. And you're going to see these statements that are made in the Old Testament several times. This is the first one that I recall in any of the prophets here coming along at this time. You'll see it with Elijah and Elisha, that none of his words fell to the ground. So all that's saying is everything he said, it happened exactly like he foretold that it would take place. All right, anything else there? Second one, next verse. From Dan to Beersheba, what did they see? Do what? All right, that he was a prophet because what? It matched with what God had said in his law. They already had Deuteronomy 18, so they knew what to look for. He was indeed a prophet of the Lord. And it says, then the Lord appeared again. The idea of the word he appeared is a form of verb where it talks about he started to appear again. In other words, this came to be his practice again, to be heard at Shiloh. What was at Shiloh? All right, the tabernacle was at Shiloh. And in the tabernacle we had the what? Ark of the Covenant. And the one who was taking care of that and the only one to go into that place was who? High priest. So he was also there that you had at Shiloh. You also have that being the place where the priests and the Levites would be serving at the house of the Lord there in Shiloh. So, when God begins to speak again, the point is, it becomes to be a thing where, again, God is using a prophet in that way, typically at this point, one who was a priest. But you're going to see that be something that not always is so. In fact, very quickly in Israelite history, God is going to go away from talking through the Levites, especially through the priest and high priest, and more to those who were prophets who were not of Levi at all. All right, anything else there? Anybody got something that we missed? All right, chapter 4, what happens then? They go out to battle, Israel does with the Philistines. What happens? They lose. How bad?
4,000 men.
All right. We got 4,000 of their footmen that die. So somebody comes up with a bright idea. What's that? All right. Let's take the Ark of the Covenant out there, and that way, what will happen? God will be with us, and we'll absolutely overcome them. What's missing from both of these, going out to war the first time, or this plan to get the ark and use it in this way?
Prayer.
All right. Prayer, asking God. What have we learned to this point, if nothing else? All right, what? All right, better ask God. If there's a plan, you ask God about it, and what will happen? God will tell you either yes or no. And you better abide by that when he tells you yes or no. This had happened during the time that they came up out of Egypt and they were going to go to warfare. This time that happened when they come along and they are at the southern border. They start to decide, well, we're going to go over and send the spies in, and 10 of the 12 tribes turn against. Oh, no, we can't do that. They're greater than we are. 2 of the spies, Joshua and Caleb, say, no, they're a great land, but God, if he's with us, then we could win. And God punishes the bulk because they refused to do what he said, because they didn't have faith in him. Then what did they decide to do? Oh, okay, we should have gone ahead and gone to battle, and we'll do that. And they got slaughtered then. And the idea was, if you're going to do something, you need to ask God beforehand. And so they don't in either case. So they take the ark out there, and now what happens to them?
30,000 men.
All right, they got 30,000 dying. Imagine that you're going out in the first place and you lose 4,000. That sounds pretty bad, doesn't it? It is pretty bad. But then the next thing that happens is you go out again, you lose 30,000. I'm right, that's over 7 times the amount, isn't it? That it? Then what happens? Then you lose the ark as well. Now, when all of that takes place, you also have 2 men who are killed, who are noted. Who's that? Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas. And so now, what takes place? This guy goes back and he tells Eli exactly what happens. What does Eli do? Falls over backwards in his chair, breaks his neck, and dies. So, you've not only lost 4,000 before, and 30,000 today, and the ark, But the one who's serving as judge now, your leader, he also dies on this day. And now, what does... Go ahead.
Well, back up a little bit. The crazy thing is that when the ark got there, they shouted so loud that the earth shook. The Philistines found out and were scared to death, and after killing 4,000 men, they were still scared and talking about this has never happened before, and they had to be pep talked. And they knew about the plagues and all that, but they still didn't follow. Why wouldn't the Philistines, if you believed all that, why wouldn't you follow God? You know what I mean? I mean, it just...
Well, the Philistines, they were scared, so they had the pep talk, as you said. And what they say, we better be very strong if we go out here.
But they knew all those facts that God had done and still wouldn't follow. You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying...
That's the Philistines you're talking about.
As a group, they knew all these facts that God had done and still weren't interested.
That's got to be a pretty good pep talk.
Yeah.
Well, to get them to go out there and say, hey, we got to be real strong if we're going to overcome them with their ark. Mm-hmm. I doubt they had any idea how much it would be a rout in favor of them. But they go out there anyway. And now you have all of this. Get back to Eli. He dies. You've got then the daughter-in-law of Samuel, of Eli. And what happens with her? She's lost her father-in-law. She's lost her husband. Okay, she gives birth to a baby. And she's at the point of giving up and obviously dies in this childbirth. And what does she say? What does she name that child? Ichabod. There you go, Shay. There's a good name for you. But Ichabod, the glory is departed, or it really means departed. The idea of the glory being departed, that's what was meant by it. The word Ichabod itself talks about one who departs, or to go through that departing process. Why the glory is departed? Where was the glory foreshown? Do what? All right, in the Ark of the Covenant. That was where that Shekinah, the glory, came forth. But since they had taken that out, and now it had been captivated, taken by the Philistines, there is no more glory, no more representation of the glory of God there in that place. So that's departed, as they say, and onward, or that they no longer have that reminder of God and His blessings present with them. How about 1 Samuel 5? They went and got the ark here at Shiloh. They went to Ebenezer and Aphek, which is where the battle was there in that place. And they take it down to where? Ashdod. That's the main city of the Philistines. So they take it to Ashdod, and it goes into what place? Okay, the house of Dagon, or the temple of Dagon, which is what? Do what? Okay, here is their capital city, if you will, and it's the chief of the temples of Dagon, who is their god, the god of the Philistines. Sometimes you'll see him as having kind of a, I think on this it kind of shows it at the back. You see that kind of look like a fish tail? That's the way Dagon was. He had a kind of a fish tail with a man's head and body above the waist. When they took it into that temple, What did they see the next morning? He had fallen down, and the word is prostrate before Dagon. In other words, he fell on his face. Now, what about the second day? Down there again, that he's falling down before the Ark of God. And this time his head's chopped off and his hands are chopped off as well. And what did they figure out? Yeah, this isn't working out so well for us. So now what are we going to do with this thing? Let's give it to people a guess. Now, what happens when they do that? More problems. They said, hey, let's give it to the people of Ekron. By this time, the people of Ekron have already heard about what happened. And what do they say? They're trying to kill us now. So what have they figured out about the Ark of God? All right. It wasn't a good luck charm for the Israelites. They had lost. But it's also not a good luck charm for them, so that they get a bunch of blessings by having this Ark of the Covenant. So what they decided to do is, we're going to get rid of it. And when they get rid of it, it goes out into the area of Ahalan, or as it's talked about sometime, Kiriath-Jearim, or Jearim, and that is where it abides until what? When is this going to be taken again? When are we going to come back to it? All right, King David's time, and how are they going to try to bring it to Jerusalem? On the cart. And we've got some things that take place there when you have the Uzzah trying to steady that, and it being pointed out that they had not followed the law of God in all of this. All right, anything else there? Go ahead.
Well, it struck the whole city, killed a bunch of them, and the ones that didn't kill got tumors.
Right.
You know, so I mean, it was serious.
Yeah, tumors and boils. There's an interesting one. The words in Hebrew are so close with regard to boils and mice, oddly enough, that some of the translations have started to go into what the Septuagint says, and that's the giving of mice that were seen, in which case, if there were mice, boils associated with that, therefore the same kind of word that exists, they've determined, well, this is the first time we have of the bubonic plague. Well, I don't know where they came up with this one, but you'll see that said, and then you'll see some other things about some weird ideas of what they had with boils and it being some other bodily problems. But the whole thing that I can see is you see tumors on them. They are ones who are dying, many of them. They have these tumors and other ways showing forth that they're suffering because of this. The effect of it was much the same as you had upon Egypt. And what was that? That they recognized God's power. It's not just this trinket here that we have has some power. If that was so, they'd want to hold on to it. But the idea is, no, the God behind it is who's doing all of this. Their concept was that if they treated the idol, Dagon, in the right way, then they would receive favors. But that's not what they see with this Ark of the Covenant. Why? Because they recognize now that's not him. There's something behind that God that's doing this. All right? Anything else there?
Aaron,
Yes.
does the ark stay with the Philistines until David brings it back with Uzzah?
Well, that's part of what we don't know, really. Yes, in the sense that it is in their territory, but it's out away from anything, it appears. Whether it's hidden or anything else, I don't know. But you have this period of time until we come along. Everybody evidently knows where it is, and it's in the possession of the Philistines because they don't come back and get it. It's not just available to take back to Shiloh. But
So how many years would that be if it's gone then?
you have that in chapter 7, I think, isn't it?
The ark's brought back in chapter 6 of 2
No, but I mean, yeah, 7:2. So it was that the ark remained in Kirjath Jearim a long time. It was there 20 years, and all the house of Israel lamented after the Lord. So that's a 20-year period that it's there during that time. But remember, that's still going to be further on down the line until it comes back to Jerusalem. It's in that place for that amount of time. All right? Go ahead.
So what?
Is that the first or second? First, okay.
What did they do? I mean, because they had and I get the names wrong, but the tabernacle, and it was in the most holy place where the priest would go. And so did they still do sacrifices and all that, or what? Do we know?
You got me.
Okay.
I don't know, but if they did, there was no effect. Because it had to be poured, or the blood had to be put on the altar to the side of the taken from the altar to the side of the Ark of the Covenant on the Day of Atonement. So there was no way for them to do it there because it wasn't present. The blood was not taken before God. Anybody else? Go ahead.
What is the Beth-Shemesh or Beth-Shemesh? Where's that at? Because that's where they sent it. When the Philistines sent it out, is that where?
Right here. That's where they sent it to.
Is that?
Okay? But what you're going to find is it goes here and here and here. That last place, it was there 20 years before you had it come to Jerusalem.
But it was in Israel, right?
No, it was under the territory of the Philistines. It's all in the territory of the Philistines. It's just not in their temples anymore.
Oh, I see.
They put it out of way. They figured that out, but that's not going to help them any. Anybody else? Okay. Let's just look at this. What are the main points you get out of this? Go ahead.
One of the things that I think shows the state of Israel at this time, but also God's state with Israel at this time, to the fact that Israel was just throwing the Ark of the Covenant out, hoping that God would be with them, but not approaching God. And also, to me, the state that God would allow the Ark to fall into the hands of the Philistines almost shows the state that God has with his people. That if you're just going to treat my Ark this way, it can go to the Philistines and it'll be all right.
All right.
If God could have, miraculously in some way, kept the Ark with Israel, the fact that he allows it to go to the Philistines, I think is a big state where God is with his people.
Yeah. They had gone so far down in what they were doing, as noted in the last part of Judges, and that's where they were now, as you look at it in 1 Samuel starting out. What else? What do you notice about how we ought to determine what we do, right or wrong, in the sight of God? Do what?
Him, his word.
All right. We go to him, we go for his instruction that is there. When we don't, what happens? Is the way of man in himself? No, it's not a man that walketh to direct his steps, Jeremiah talked about. This is a good illustration of that. That you have these people failing to ask God what his desire was, what he wanted them to do, and as a result, they fail.
I think the main things I get out of this too, from his Eli's sons to Samuel to Philistines, God's going to be honored regardless, one way or another. Between them letting the ark go and then it set it up from God's God's power is real. It's going to be honored one way or another.
Good deal. Would a loving God punish people? Looks pretty much like he would here, doesn't it? Would a loving God punish people who thought they were doing right, even though they didn't do right? We got to keep in mind, here were people, when they took the ark out there, they thought that was a good idea. They thought God would be with them in it. But they had failed to ask God, and it was lethal to them. All right, we'll stop there and have the next lesson. Let me turn over there to it. Yeah, number 18, 1 Samuel 6 through 8.